to Writing the West podcast. Our guest today is scholar George Matthews, who discusses the life and legend behind Billy the Kid, one of America's greatest outlaws. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career up until now?
Well, for a long time, I was the director of athletics um, and a teacher of history. Um, I have two Master of Arts degrees, one in physical education and one in history. My Master of Arts degree in history is from New Mexico State University. Um, and I've written four previous books, and Billy is my fifth. I guess I could also say I'm a member of Biographers International organization and independent scholars.
Perfect. Well, we're glad to have you on, somebody who definitely seems to know what they're talking about, and it's always nice to peel back behind some of these legends that have become almost mythical and really dig in and see. And I'd love to know, like, what is your first memory of Billy the Kid? Where did you first hear about him?
Oh, like almost everyone else, I guess, TV series growing up. Back in Maryland, by the way. I'm a transplant to New Mexico, but I don't know if New Mexico has adopted me, but I have adopted New Mexico. Um, so I consider myself a New Mexican these days. But my earliest recollections were, let's see, who was it? Clu Clu Gallagher, I believe, was playing Billy the Kid. I forget which movie it was, but that's my earliest. And of course, coming out to New Mexico a long time ago, Lincoln, New Mexico is the site of the Lincoln County War. So if you live in New Mexico, you got to know about Billy the Kid.
And what about his life stood out to you? There's a lot of Old West outlaws to choose from. And we'll obviously get into more of what led you to the book, obviously, but was there something about Billy that always kind of stood out to you, or was it that connection to New Mexico?
Well, he does stand out because he's not your typical outlaw. Really, he was a horse and cattle thief as far as being an outlaw goes. His involvement in the Lincoln County War, um, with the killings that went on both sides, of course, that was considered a war. And Billy was indicted for the killing, for the assassination, really, of Sheriff William Brady. But what makes Billy unique is that his dealings with the governor of New Mexico, and then, of course, his great escape, in that after the Lincoln County War, the new governor of the territory, Lew Wallace, granted amnesty to everyone involved in the Lincoln County War, except for those who had already been indicted. So Billy had already been indicted, as well as some others, for the assassination of William Brady. Then Lew Wallace promised Billy a pardon, even though he'd been indicted. He offered him a pardon, and that's what makes Billy unique. Um, Billy then testified against um, a Santa Fe ring member who had been involved in the killing of an attorney in Lincoln. Um, and that testimony should have given Billy that pardon. Lew Wallace wanted to find out who had murdered and to convict the murderers of that attorney in Lincoln. Billy was an eyewitness to that murder. He was not involved, obviously, but he knew who killed that attorney. And for his testimony, the governor promised a pardon for the killing of William Brady. Billy did testify, upheld his end of the bargain, and then the governor failed to follow through with his pardon. Um, and we'll talk a little bit about the reasons for that later. But that's what makes Billy unique. He was then convicted really in a kangaroo court run by the Santa Fe Ring. Um, and the governor he could have pardoned Billy. They couldn't stop the pardon from happening. Only the governor can do that. He refused to do so. Um, and Billy is convicted, is sentenced to hang by that judge back in Lincoln. Um, and Billy then makes his tremendous, dramatic escape from the Lincoln jail by killing two deputies and going back to Fort Sumner. That's what makes Billy unique. If he had not escaped, um, we would never have heard of Billy the Kid.
Wow. Yeah,
Um,
and I think
yeah.
Billy, he brings up such a, an American ideal of a man wronged by the system, in a lot of ways. And do you think, or were people in his own time sympathetic to that, or was that something that was kind of kept under wraps, that
Oh,
governor pardon?
absolutely, absolutely sympathetic to Billy.
Yeah,
He was admired by almost everyone except for those who were members of the Santa Fe Ring.
right,
And that's most of the people in Lincoln County. Um, the Hispanics in Lincoln County adored Billy. Um, and he often said that to the governor, Lew Wallace, you can ask any of my friends in Lincoln County for as far as my character goes when he was negotiating for his pardon. Um, Lew Wallace was probably then influenced by the Santa Fe Ring, who really had control of the judicial system, the political system, the media, the newspapers. They were almost all Santa Fe Ring affiliates.
wow,
Uh, so Billy really, in a traditional outlaw sense, he didn't rob banks, stagecoaches. He didn't kill people just for the fun of it, like other outlaws like Jesse James. Um, so, in the traditional sense, he really wasn't an outlaw, um, and he was wronged by the system. And you could say, I think, that what makes Billy unique is it most people or a lot of people consider him a martyr for personal freedom.
right.
Um, and I think that's what makes him truly unique and an icon, an American icon.
Definitely. Well, and you brought up a great point that, people in his own time were so sympathetic, and I'm sure that, his eventual killing at the hands of, somebody who he at one point was friends with, Pat Garrett, um, did that almost solidify his legendary status at that point?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. I might say, as far as Pat Garrett being a friend of Billy, he was not a good friend of Billy. He was an acquaintance.
Okay.
They had both been in Fort Sumner. That's where they met. Um, Pat Garrett at the time was a bartender in Fort Sumner when Billy met him. Billy was much closer friends with his fellow regulators than he was with Pat Garrett.
All right.
But that's okay. They did know each other, and that certainly has become part of the legend,
Right.
which is okay.
Well, and you've done such a great amount of research into Billy for this book, and one of the things that stood out to me in the marketing materials about it was, that we for the first time have this true full image of him as a person, from his early upbringing, and there's so much about his mother and his early life in this book, and before we ever get to New Mexico, and now that you've been able to assemble that kind of real three-dimensional view of Billy the Kid as a person, how would you describe him to somebody who's never met him before?
Oh, describing Billy the Kid. Young, obviously, died at 21 years of age.
Right.
Um, Great sense of humor. Um, he was, um, I think that's his greatest attribute. He was a ladies' man, no doubt of that. Um, his Paulita Maxwell in Fort Sumner in the 1920s would say that she wasn't in love with Billy, but she sure liked him a lot, and that he had senoritas all along the Pecos River.
Wow.
Um, I think she does protest it too much, but anyway, um, he was charismatic. Um, he had a he was considered handsome at the time by people, and with his his buck teeth appearance was his one facial, um, I guess, deficiency, you'd say, but didn't seem to be a problem at the time. Uh, Gregarious, outgoing, excuse me, um, um, party guy, loved to sing and dance. Um, by the way, he did not play the fiddle. One of the legends has him playing the fiddle. That's not true. But he did love to sing and dance and was very popular with the ladies in both Lincoln, well, everywhere he went. Lincoln, Fort Sumner, Santa Fe, very popular guy.
It seems to me, like some other people throughout history that have become legend, that had Billy been given different circumstances, he probably would have been pretty successful in a lot of different ventures. Now after, doing so much research about him and his life, how much of what happened to him would you say was a result of, the circumstances that he found himself in?
No question, 100%.
Yeah.
Um, Without the Lincoln County War, um, uh, Billy was when he came. Excuse me, when he came to New Mexico, and he was in Santa Fe, which is where he learned Spanish, of course. Um, and then they moved to Silver City, New Mexico. He went to school there. He arrived there when he was 12 years old in March of 1873. Um, if he had not gotten in, um, he was involved in an accessory to a robbery in Silver City. Um, and he was jailed. He was arrested and jailed by the Silver City sheriff. And he escaped through the chimney of the jail instead of standing trial. If he had stayed in Silver City and stood trial for accessory to robbery, he probably would have been cleared or given some sort of a light sentence. And he probably would have gone on like all the other of his fellow students in Silver City at the time. And they were all very successful in life and never became outlaws. Um, and I think Billy would have done the same.
Yeah. What was there any now that you've done this such innate research, was there any reason that Billy had such a strong self-preservation drive? He never seems to want to be stuck in one place, especially a jail cell for too long. Was there anything about his past or upbringing that you think made him climb out of that chimney that day?
No, I don't think so. Of course, his mother died in 1874. He escaped from that jail in 1875. But a lot of people, um, uh, mothers had died or
Right.
fathers had died, and um, I don't think that made Billy any different from anybody else that experienced that. Uh, I experienced that, and I didn't climb out of chimney. But um, I don't think so. I think it was a matter of he was light, he was agile, he was athletic. That's for sure. Um, and I think he was 15 years old in 1875 in that jail, and I don't want to be in jail. And the instead of standing trial, he got scared and left.
Yeah.
Um, a unique situation. I don't think his mother dying was a factor.
Right. Like everybody else at his time and his age, just fear probably drove some of those decisions, as it always does.
Of course,
Yeah.
Of
Um,
course, his escape from the Lincoln jail was indeed self-preservation. He
right.
had been sentenced to hang.
He knew what was coming.
So, yeah, I mean, no choice there. You either
Right,
escape or you get hung.
right.
So,
Well, and I want to take a step back just for a moment before we get too into Billy, because obviously the reason for us talking today is your book, Billy the Kid: The Life Behind the Legend. And in that your book, it talks about new primary material being made available in the last 15, 20 years since I think Frederick Nolan's book, which you said was a big inspiration to you back in the late 90s. Can you talk just for a second, as far as researchers are concerned, what are some of the new materials that have been either found or released about Billy that helped to make this book possible?
all kinds of stuff. Letters, diaries, um, books have been written on other people involved in the Lincoln County War. There was a book written on Susan McSween. And so there's a lot of information about the Lincoln County War um, in that book, based upon Susan McSween's life and her um, involvement in Lincoln and Lincoln County. There's been um, a book was written on Juan Patron, who was a resident of Lincoln and the Speaker of the House of Representatives in New Mexico that was involved in the Lincoln County War. And the author of that book um, found a document, as one example, found a document that Juan Patron submitted to the state of New Mexico um, to be reimbursed for jailing Billy the Kid.
Oh, wow.
Uh, Billy the Kid, Billy the Kid was not placed in jail in the Lincoln jail the first time. Um, he was put in Juan Patron's home. Um, and that's where he was serenaded by the senoritas and the people in Lincoln as part of his legend, which happens to be true, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, but so that document of for reimbursement that it tells that he had Billy Bonney in his house for 27 days from a certain date to the next date. Um, and so we know that he was there for those amount of time, and we know who he was jailed with. His buddy, Tom Fowler, was also part of that reimbursement document. Um, and um, so there, a book, another book on the Presbyterian minister in Lincoln, Taylor Ely. Um, his diary that he kept at the time about the Lincoln County War sheds a great deal of information on Billy. Um, his wife said that Billy used to come to Presbyterian church services where he would sing to her accompaniment on the piano. Um, so I decided that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. And Frederick Nolan was the inspiration for my research. And I dedicated the book to Frederick Nolan, to his memory. He passed away in 22, I believe. Um, I decided that the great unknown about Billy was where he was born, um, and his mother, um, how they got to Indiana, for example. So I decided to research the history of Irish immigration.
Right.
And that revealed a great deal of information. Um, and that's some of the new information in the book. Um, others, let's see.
Yeah. And
Another author found, go ahead.
I was going to stop you just for a second because, like you said, a vast majority of the first section of the book is about Billy's mother. And I just found that so interesting because, just like Billy that we mentioned before, so much of the decisions and instances, circumstances really that she found herself in were a result of the time and the place in which she lived. How women, Irish women, were treated, or what types of work they found when they came to America, and um, what was I know you said this was all kind of new research in terms of the life of Billy the Kid, and what were some of the surprises about what you found in pretty much this genealogical research that you were doing?
Definite genealogical research. Um, what I found surprising was the amount of material that's available. Um, I'll just give a very brief summary. Catherine McCarty was Billy's mother. She was an Irish immigrant, and when began the research into the history of Irish immigration, to my surprise, I discovered that the the Great Irish Potato Famine, historians label that as happening between 1845 and 1855. And with hindsight, that is accurate. But at the time, 1 year potato famines were common in Ireland. So in the 1820s, you'd have an 1825 potato famine. But the next year, everything was fine.
Hmm.
Then in 1832, you'd have another one, and next year it was fine. In 1845, there was another 1 year famine. Um, but and in 1846 is when Catherine McCarty immigrated from Ireland to the United States. And at the time, she was not coming because of the Great Irish Potato Famine. She was coming to better herself. She was not Catholic, which everybody assumes all Irish immigrants were. Uh, and we, the document that's available to researchers is Catherine McCarty came to America in 1846 when she was 17 years old. And the ship's passenger list lists all the Irish immigrants with their ages and their occupations that they're going to be when they come to America. So that's the Devonshire was the passenger ship. Every woman on that ship, every man on that ship as well, was an Irish immigrant coming to America. Every man was coming to America to be a laborer. Every woman was coming to America to be a domestic servant. That's critical in knowing what Billy's mother was going to be when she came to the United States. It
Right.
also tells us that she was 17, coming to America to be a domestic servant, and the Irish Immigration Society of New York was telling Irish immigrants in 1846 not to stay in New York City or any other East Coast city, but to take the Erie Canal and go to the interior cities of Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Chicago. That information tells us how she got to Indianapolis. That's all new information and critical to how she got to Indianapolis.
Right. And I think there's definitely a consciousness of these Old West legends, and especially the outlaws of, they lived no life before that first shot, but there is so much to uncover behind that. He shows the influence, and really helps us understand the full picture a little bit better. And for you, when you were setting out to write this book, and you wanted to focus more on obviously his mother and her arrival, and how Billy, got to New Mexico and all of the different stops along the way. You know, what was it, kind of like a geographic hunt, or did you have a sense of the overall trajectory? It was just about pinning down that research.
Um, we knew um, that Billy, we knew that Billy was in Indianapolis as a young child.
Hmm.
Um, we knew that he went to Kansas, to Wichita, Kansas, and we knew he came to New Mexico, first to Santa Fe and then Silver City and then Lincoln County. So we knew that kind of geographical history. What we didn't know um, was exactly when and how he got to those different and why he got to those different places. Um, uh, the sheriff of Silver City that arrested Billy the first time said that he was born in Anderson, Indiana, in an interview in 1902. Um, and that's been largely neglected by a lot of researchers. So if I felt that if I could go back and if I obviously could find out where Billy the Kid's mother was when he was born, that would pretty much tell us where he was born.
Exactly.
Um, so um, it was uh, the research into the details were important more so than the geographical trail. Absolutely.
Right. And it's amazing to me, reading through your book, and speaking with you about all of these new things that we're learning. I mean, Billy the Kid's legend, like you said, started, even before his death, and it's been, hundreds of years almost. Why has there been such a delay in terms of, uncovering some of this, in terms of maybe new documents that come to light? Is there anything that you found that's really held some of that research back before now?
Well, actually, the research of peeling back the layers of legend um, began in the 1950s. And as I mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of new books coming out in recent years um, that have shed a lot more light on Billy the Kid. Um, the I guess the first um, real new documentation occurred in the 1950s with the discovery of a marriage certificate in Santa Fe between Billy's mother and William Henry Harrison Antrim.
Hmm.
And that had not been known before. So um, all the legends created by Walter Noble Burns in his book in 1925 um, um, slowly began to be peeled away starting in the 1950s. Um, and then um, the letters and diaries that people found, court records, military records, or all those other books on other people involved in Lincoln County, Billy's contemporaries, added to the new light. What I've done is add further information based upon research. I picked two areas. One was Irish immigration, which revealed a tremendous amount of Billy's mother, which in turn gave a lot of information about Billy, of course. But the other area, Billy was known to be a reader of dime novels. So I decided to research what dime novels, for example, would Billy be reading
Right.
um, at the time. And a great deal of new information surfaced from just that information. Um, um, and then comparing the documents, the primary documents, going back and researching all the primary documents that other people had talked about earlier. And there were some discrepancies.
Hmm.
So that helped my research as well.
So it sounds like, when you undertake a research project of not only this magnitude, but also on a topic that's so well known, you almost have to start at the old research because some of that might need to be corrected along the way.
Absolutely. There's no question of that.
Right, right.
Um,
I was going to
just
ask,
one example.
yeah, go ahead, please.
Go ahead. Now, I'm just going to give one example of a legend that need to be corrected. Walter Noble Burns, in his book, said that during the uh, Lincoln County War, when Billy and the regulators uh, uh, were in the McSween house and under siege, that Susan McSween played the Star Spangled Banner, and Billy beat time with the butt of his pistol on some hardwood to the tune. Um, Susan McSween later refuted all of that. Uh, Walter Noble Burns made it up, and stuff like that was a pleasure to to really shed new light on the real story of what happened with Billy.
Definitely. And one thing I was going to ask too is, that I've seen at least, and I'm no Billy the Kid researcher, but I've seen in recent years, there was the new photograph of Billy the Kid that came up from like a $2 thrift store find. And obviously we had the long-standing photo of him with his guns at the ready. Have there been any new photos as or ideas that there might even be more of him, and what do you make of I think there's been two confirmed, and as far as how that the image of him compares to the research that you've done about him?
Well, actually, there's only one, the original authenticated photo of Billy the Kid.
Okay.
Um, there's only one. All the new ones, the Croquet Billy, I think you're
Yeah,
referring to,
yep, yep.
that has not been authenticated. Um, None of the others have been authenticated. Everyone wants there to be another
Of
photograph,
course.
and everybody's is submitting. There are a number of Billy the Kid Facebook groups, and everybody's always submitting new photographs of Billy. He would have been a very photograph. He would have been a very popular subject, I guess. But
Yeah,
at any rate, there's only one, and no other photograph has been authenticated. That's the bottom line.
right.
Unfortunately, that croquet photo, by the way, it looks very interesting, and I really wish it was, but it's simply not.
Right.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, let's focus on, and you have the original authenticated image in your book, a pressing of that, and you know, just looking at that photo, and I pulled it up myself. Um, what can we tell about him having this? I honestly think it's great that we even have one image of him because of the rise of his legend, and you've done so much research about the man through the primary source documents. Does his image match up with what people had described, and is there anything that we can divulge from that photo that might not be obvious to just a passerby?
um, Actually, the Paulita Maxwell, his sweetheart in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, described the photograph as she hated it. She said it did not describe Billy at all, that he was much better looking in that photo, and he never dressed that way. He was always well dressed. Um, so, in her view, that image gives a completely distorted image of Billy the Kid, William Body, Henry McCarty.
Right.
Um, so, that was posed. Um, what should I say? Um, that was posed to uh, give the idea that Billy was, well, that Billy was an outlaw and that type of thing. And oh gosh, I'm not describing this very well. Uh, it does not reveal anything about Billy that, well, I just leave it with Paulita Maxwell felt it was just totally wrong to present that photo of Billy, and it does not reveal anything about his character at all.
Interesting.
Um, yeah,
And speaking of
of
wrong,
course, the photo.
yeah, please.
I do have to say something. The photo, of course, when it was taken, was in a reversed image.
Hmm,
So when you see the original photo and it hasn't been reversed to be a true photograph, it shows him being left-handed, and that gave rise to the myth that he was left-handed. And of course, Paul Newman's movie, The Left-Handed Gun, further contributed to that legend. Um, but he was not left-handed, and you needed to reverse that photograph. Um, so the image really doesn't reveal anything about Billy's character um, um, at all, according to Paulita Maxwell, who knew him very, very well.
Right. Well, and speaking of, this is a great transition. I wanted to talk about the Hollywood portrayals. And that was something obviously that you said was, the first encounter for you and Billy the Kid, and it's been done a number of times. From Paul Newman, you just mentioned the left-handed gun, to Emilio Estevez and Val Kilmer, who just recently passed away, and yeah, we could probably go on and on about what they don't get right, but are there any of these portrayals that hit Billy the Kid on the mark in any sort of way?
Uh, Young Guns certainly is the best.
Okay, wow.
There's no question. Emilio Estevez uh, did the best job of capturing the personality of Billy the
Right,
Kid, without question, no doubt. Um, um, the others, Paul Newman, as how should I say it? Paul Newman was a great actor, and he captured what he was told to capture in the way of Billy the Kid,
right,
which was totally inaccurate.
right.
um, and others, Val Kilmer, um, and others um, are fine actors, were fine actors, and did good jobs. But as far as actually portraying Billy the Kid as he was in true life, no question, Emilio Estevez did the best job,
Well, he's always been
without
my
doubt.
favorite, so I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. End of story. End
Yeah,
of discussion there.
there you go. Yeah, and New Mexico plays such a large role, obviously, in Billy's legend. I think because of it was a short time period of his life, but so much of those really touchstone moments of his legend happened there, and you lived there, and how gratifying has it been for you as a researcher to be in those trails and in those places where Billy once traveled?
Well, first of all, I need to say that anyone who's interested in Billy the Kid needs to visit Lincoln, New Mexico.
Okay.
Um, it's a state historic site. The buildings of Billy the Kid's day are still there. You can walk the stairs up to the jail where Billy was held in Lincoln, where he made his great escape from. Um, First and foremost, anyone who's interested in Billy the Kid, that's a pilgrimage you have to make. Lincoln, New Mexico is the spot. As far as the much of the landscape in New Mexico is largely intact from his days. So to be able to hike and bike on those trails today, um, you can go you can hike into the site where John Henry Tunstall was murdered, for example.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and yeah, it, you can't you cannot write a Billy the Kid book or understand Billy the Kid without visiting Lincoln and Lincoln County, New Mexico. Um, it's just not possible. You can read all you want, but when you walk up those stairs, for example, and know where the Deputy Bell was running down for his life, that's a special experience,
Wow.
and um, it was critical. It gave me a much greater understanding for writing the book. I dedicated the book to Frederick Nolan, and Fred Nolan always regretted that he never had the opportunity to come to New Mexico for an extended period of time to do research on Billy.
Right.
He had great researchers um, that did some research for him, um, but he always regretted that, and that was a great advantage I had. And he established the the gold bar for Billy the Kid research.
Right.
Um, and and his researchers here in New Mexico, and I'll mention one. Um, um, well, um, the researchers here did a great job for Fred Nolan, but to be able to actually hike and bike and walk in those buildings, um, it really gives you a better sense of Billy the Kid's history.
Right. You mentioned the courthouse stairs and other. Has there been a spot that for you was just, you know, the really landmark place in your Billy the Kid travels?
Well, I mentioned the Tunstall murder site. That's certainly a spot that needs to be visited.
Right.
Um, Lincoln County War, of course, all happened because of the murder of John Henry Tunstall,
Right.
Billy's employer. Um, as far and there are trails. There's the Whiskey Trail, for example, that goes from Lincoln over to um, the Rio Doce Valley and the Tunstall murder site. You can still walk that. You can still bike that.
Wow.
Um, and so, yeah, there's Lincoln County. There's oh, let's see. There's um, Fort Stanton is in New Mexico, and you can hike and bike from Fort Stanton to Lincoln, which Billy did many times. Um, People ride uh, horseback rides um, from Lincoln out to Fort Sumner today. You can still do that. Um, so yeah, it's a great advantage. The landscape is obviously changed, but there's a lot still intact.
Would you say too, you know, as a New Mexican, that the Billy the Kid legend is alive and well in that area? Have they kind of taken him on as one of their own?
Absolutely. I might add that Fort Sumner, Billy is buried in Fort Sumner.
Right.
And uh, Fort Sumner is another site, as well as Lincoln, that a Billy the Kid, uh, anyone interested in Billy the Kid needs to visit. Fort Sumner, of course, that's where he was uh, uh, shot and killed by Pat Garrett, and that's where he's buried. So that is another site. Those two, um, Silver City, New Mexico, is where he went to school, is another site that needs to be visited. Um, I think those three would be the most important sites for Billy the Kid.
The great map trip right there for anyone who wants to go out. Three great spots. And bring your book with you.
Absolutely.
And then read the original documents about what happened.
Indeed.
Um, the other thing I was going to ask you too, you know, as a New Mexican, you know, the legend of we just had another Hollywood portrayal of Billy the Kid in a TV series and the movie Old Henry. And so, you know, it's obvious that the legend is it just continues to grow and continues to develop in different ways. And, you know, why do you think the public has continued to build on, you know, Billy's legend versus some of these other, you know, of his contemporaries that followed similar paths? And why has Billy the Kid just remained such an icon in that area?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think Billy is unique, however, um, uh, in his role. And as I said earlier, a martyr to personal freedom
Right,
because he was wronged by the system. And that's what really makes Billy unique.
right,
And his dealings with the governor of New Mexico, as I mentioned, um, that makes him totally different. And then you add on to that his dramatic escape from the Lincoln County Jail um, and his um, his going to Fort Sumner, and then his killing by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Um, there's no other outlaw that fits those criteria.
right.
It truly makes Billy unique. And so you keep building the first Walter Noble Burns. Um, and of course, Billy was so well liked
Right.
by everyone in New Mexico, that, well, everywhere he went, that when Walter Noble Burns published his book in 1925 and further enhanced Billy's legend, and further made him, there's another recent book out that says Billy the Kid, El Bandito Simpatico. And that kind of sums up Billy's um, image among New Mexicans during his time, and people have latched on to that. And there's probably more writing about Billy the Kid as an American icon. I don't know. I want to say than George Washington,
Yeah.
but there's been a tremendous amount of stuff written about Billy the Kid because of his personality and the circumstances of his being wronged by the Santa Fe ring.
Right.
I think that's what truly makes Billy unique and has truly made him an American icon.
Is there any outlook for future work, scholarship for you and Billy? Are there any unanswered questions that you're still itching to uncover?
Um, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Um, um, I think we now have we have a complete image. We, with that, oh boy, with the research I did on the Irish immigration, that really revealed a lot about Billy the Kid's mother. The fact that she was a domestic servant in Indiana. When they go to Wichita, she buys a lot of property, and she got that money from her time as a domestic servant in Indiana. Um, she contracts tuberculosis, and that's why they go to New Mexico for her health. So all that information, and then telling or researching the history of Indiana and Indianapolis, and to find out that by the 1860s, when Billy's mother is there, um, actually she gets there 1846, but at any rate, when she gets there, they already have a flourishing public school system. Billy gets there, uh, is born there in Anderson, Indiana, according to the sheriff in Silver City. Um, so the likelihood of him going to school in Indianapolis, that's where he learns to read and write.
All right.
There's no question of that. So we know where he was born. We know where he went to school. We know why he went to Wichita and then New Mexico. We have a fairly complete uh, picture now of Billy the Kid. And we can correct some of the historical errors as well. It would be nice, though, to find a new photograph.
Yes.
It would be nice. It really would. That would be something that would really add to the story of Billy. I hope we do.
Me too. Me too. And in the meantime, we'll have to just turn on Young Guns and have your new book out on the coffee table to fill our appetites for Billy the Kid.
By the way, I think Young Gunsling 3 will be a very enjoyable film. I'm not sure how historically accurate it's going to be, but that doesn't matter. It's going to be very entertaining.
That's
So
right.
I wish them well.
That's right. Well, George, thank you so much for your time. I know we could spend days, but that would satisfy people too much, and they wouldn't go out and buy your book. And I would love for everyone who's listening to go to McFarlane and Company, who published Billy the Kid: The Life Behind the Legend by George R. Matthews. And we appreciate you, George, for talking with us today and giving us just a little piece of the puzzle of what you researched and this undertaking that you took.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.